Welcome to Fantastic People. I'm Christian.
And I'm Regan. And here with us today is a very special guest all the way. I mean, like all the way.
Might be our furthest yet. Furthest in person.
Originally from Pensacola, Florida.
Of course, as is everyone.
But currently in Mobile, Alabama. Is Grant Spencer. Grant is the host of the newly independent podcast. So he is here with us today. Grant, how you doing?
Doing great. Happy to be here.
What's up, buddy? What's it like moving to Mobile?
It's good.
Yeah.
It's far enough away.
Yeah.
But close enough.
I went to college in Mobile, and I felt exactly like that. That was like, I could come home when I want to, but people aren't just going to like show up unexpectedly.
People aren't going to drive an hour and a half for no reason.
No.
It's nice.
I can count on 3 fingers the amount of times I've actually been to Mobile and not just drove through it.
There's good stuff in Mobile. You got to check it out.
Oh, some of the best things that I've done have been there.
Yeah. One thing that I did a lot of when I was there, I was a poor college student, so I would like search my dorm room for like $2 and then go to Krispy Kreme downtown at like 2 o'clock in the morning and buy as many donuts as I could, which was up like 3.
Yeah, how many was that?
Yeah, probably like 2 or 3. You know what? I was happy though. Those were good times.
That's good. Yeah.
That was my biggest worry. How many donuts can I get at Krispy Kreme right now?
How often did you search your couch for donut money?
It was that couch you're sitting on, actually.
Oh, wow.
Was the couch that was in my dorm room. And, way more than I count. I didn't sleep in
search
college.
it for some change in it.
Yeah, I probably don't. That's cool, man. What took you out to Mobile from Pensacola?
New job.
New job.
Yes.
Doing what exactly?
I've worked in industrial for a while, and I got a job at a steel plant north of Mobile, about 40 minutes north of Mobile. So I'm working out there now and had to move closer because I'm not driving an hour and a half every day.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I hear that. I work on the Navy base, and it's like an hour for me, and I refuse to move closer. But
there's nothing worth moving close to over there.
Correct.
So.
But if I got a job in Mobile, I probably would make the move over there.
Although no offense to any of my family that might be listening to this podcast or anybody else that lives out there.
I'm not interested in living out closer to the Navy base.
I'll go visit, but I'm not living out there.
I did it in increments too. So I moved to Spanish Fort for a year.
Yeah.
And then we moved to Saraland for a year. And now we're living in Saraland, and it's great.
Yeah.
Now I've got like a 30-minute drive, which is a lot better. When I was in Spanish Fort, I'm driving across that bridge every day, twice a day. You know, after 12-hour shifts. It's not fun.
The bridge is it is a unique problem, I think. It's like the only place in our area that I legitimately would be like, that's traffic. A lot of people, I grew up in Atlanta, and we have traffic in Atlanta. When people complain about traffic here, I'm like, you guys don't know that. But the bridge, the Bay Bridge, going from Spanish Fort to Mobile, Alabama, that's traffic.
Yeah, that's like real traffic.
That's real traffic.
That's the closest East Coasters get to like California traffic.
Yeah. I would say all the way from the Bay Bridge to 65, where 65 and 10 meet, that's real traffic. There's just so much comes through that area, especially going into the tunnel. It's nuts. But I always did enjoy seeing trucks hit the Wallace Tunnel. That was very common. But Mobile, Alabama is a good town.
Do you hold your breath every time you go under the...
I'm sure you don't.
Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I did a few times.
Yeah.
When I was...
I haven't we've, for whatever reason, had to go that way a lot lately. So I haven't done it probably the last 3 or 4 years. But
when your kids are older.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, that's true. When they're older, I'll tell them to do it.
Yeah, when I was teaching music, we would have like events in Mobile, and we would play at South Alabama or something, and so you're on a bus full of teenagers, and they're all like, let's hold our breath. And
it's definitely a rite of passage for musicians.
Yeah.
It's definitely a music thing. Like, oh, I'm a singer, I got to hold my breath.
Especially,
that's true. I guess that's probably where I did it first.
Yep.
It's on a music trip.
Horn players, they think they can hold their breaths for a long time, and they can. They definitely can, but it's very, very common in the music world, I think. It'd be something to look up if that's like a thing that happens with non-musicians.
Or if you're listening this week, send us a tweet or tag us on Facebook or send us an email if people still do that. And let us know if you've ever done it or when's the last time you did it.
Or where did you learn it from?
Yeah,
Whether or not you were a musician.
That's actually a great question. Where did you learn it from?
Because I'm sure I heard it on a band trip.
Yeah, it was probably
positive.
a choir trip on a tour bus.
I was, I mean, I don't know. I moved here right before high school, so it's kind of hard to tell when exactly my first experience was. But most likely it was a band trip. And someone, probably a girl, told me to do it. And I did it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Of course. You
That's what
accept the
happens.
challenge. Period.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what it is.
So we're not here to talk about Mobile, Alabama, though we probably could. Grant, this is kind of has to do with what your podcast is about. But you started the podcast because you're a fan of doing this thing. Right? Am I off topic here?
Yes. No, you're good.
So, what is it? What are you a fan of? What are we talking about today?
Pursuing truth.
What exactly does that mean? That's a big statement.
Yes,
A
it
lot
is.
can be entailed in that.
There is a lot entailed in that, and that's kind of the point. Pursuing truth, to break it down, I love researching and studying politics and religion and philosophy. And behind all of those things is what we believe and why we believe it.
Where did that, it's weird for a person to say, oh, I'm a fan of research.
Right.
I mad respect for it, but I'm just saying that's an odd one we've had on this podcast so far. Where did you discover that, hey, this is actually, let me backtrack for a second. I think a reason why people would say that that's probably a rare thing is because in some cases I feel like it may stress a person out.
Yes.
So how did you find that it's actually relaxing for you?
I've always loved school and learning. Like I've always enjoyed maths, English, all that kind of stuff, history. So studying that kind of thing is enjoyable to me, to learn new things and just grow in my mind.
Do you think it's easier? I related a lot to a reading. When you're in a literature class and you're told to read something, a person automatically doesn't enjoy it because they don't like to be told to do
Exactly.
it. Do you find that you enjoy it more choosing on your own what you're doing?
That's a good point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been proven scientifically. If you look up something that you're actually interested in, you're going to enjoy it and learn it a lot better than something you don't. So like at my school, they teach Shakespeare horribly. Anybody that's gone to PCA or PCC usually hates Shakespeare, but people that go to public school usually like Shakespeare. And it's all about just how it's taught and how it's forced upon you.
No, well, now I'm curious. You went to private school. You went to public school. What do you think of Shakespeare?
I mean, I think positively of Shakespeare. I know that I probably don't. I do not understand it near as well as my wife does, but that's because she, got her English degree. So
I don't understand it near as well as your wife does as well. But if you go in my office, which is right down this hallway here, you'll find about 4 or 5 different Shakespeare books. Because or plays, whatever you want to call them. Because his work.
yeah, it's enjoyable.
Thank you.
Certainly, I would go to. I would go to
Yeah.
see the plays for sure.
That's off topic, but I was just curious to test out that hypothesis.
I did. Well, I didn't. High school was public, but I had some time in private school. So.
Did you ever when you were in English class? Did you do this at PCA? Did you act out like Romeo and Juliet?
No.
Oh, did you?
I don't know if we did Romeo and Juliet, but we did. Oh man,
Hamlet, Macbeth.
No,
Macbeth's the other.
We definitely read it.
Yeah.
I mean, there were many English classes where we would read it, and each person was assigned
A person. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, and you would just read it as if you're that character,
Yeah.
which was usually pretty horrible. But
I think we did a little bit of Macbeth,
Yeah.
not Romeo and Juliet.
in 10th grade, I was in drama, and for an assignment, we had to recite Mark Antony's speech.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I got extra credit because you got extra credit if you acted it out. I memorized it the night before and successfully acted it out. And
Well, now we're telling stories.
Yeah.
no, people actually clapped in the class. But anyway, that was fun.
Julius Caesar was another
that
one
was a
we did.
fun.
We acted
Yeah.
that one out.
Yeah,
I played Mercutio in our redoing of Romeo
I
and
think I was
Juliet.
Romeo when we did it.
I still remember the entire first act,
It's awesome.
all of Mercutio's lines.
We're unlocking some core memories.
Yeah.
Maybe we
here.
should do one on Shakespeare.
You talk about getting extra credit and doing something last minute, and then we will get back to the.
Yes.
I just have to tell this story. So we did a similar thing, but for Animal Farm, and we had to come up with a piece of propaganda.
Okay.
And so the night before, I took Yesterday by the Beatles, and I rewrote it into a propaganda piece for Animal Farm. I did it the night before. Awesome. Also got extra credit on it, and I played it in front of the class. Yep.
Yeah.
So, back to what we were talking about. I know you, so I'm going to ask this question even though I kind of know the answer. Do you think a lot about your growing up and education in the private school environment because it's so sheltered?
Yes.
Do you think that kind of
so.
Spurned you to see what else was out there?
Eventually.
Yeah.
For a while, it's very comfortable in that shelter. Mm-hmm. So not until probably middle school, high school did I get to a point where I started to question things and wonder what else is out there. The typical teenage rebellion phase, breaking out of that shelter is definitely where that happened.
Do you think there was is there a specific event or something that caused you to really start to?
There were a couple specific events. I mean, it's kind of a chain of events, not really one specific thing. But, growing up in a Southern Baptist home, going to a Southern Baptist school, all my friends are from churches that are Southern Baptist or non-denominational. You kind of hear one thing, and then going to high school and meeting people that are outside of your school, outside of your church, start to open your mind up to different things. Or, if a friend invites me to a different church that's maybe non-denominational or independent Southern Baptist that does different things, kind of get to see different churches and how they do things differently and where they get different verses from, things like that. So I remember being 14 or 15, and I went to a new church, and I had never been baptized, which was like a big thing. But the churches that I had gone to said, you just have to get baptized at some point. It's not really a big deal. But this new church that I was going to, their belief was that you had to be baptized to be saved. So it's kind of an eye-opening moment for me to go from, wait a minute, I got saved when I was 5, I'm good, to go from, oh, these people are telling me I'm not saved, which is like hold on, I gotta, I'm getting told two different things. I need to start looking into this. And from there, learning other sides of faith and other faiths got me to kind of start questioning things to where, I need to know what's true and what's not. Because when you talk about faith, you're talking about the most important question,
There's a big issue in our society, and specifically within religion, but I think it's true for other things that I would even consider doctrine if we're talking about, ethics or morals or rules to live by. Is we have to understand that there are secondary and tertiary issues.
Yes.
And we're very, very bad. Again, no matter your tribe, the three of us, all could probably have a conversation about what that looks like within interdenominations in Protestant churches. And we probably also, the three of us could all have it, outside of that. But I think even on a broad spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, even liberals and then leftists and Republicans and conservatives, like even within those more specific tribes outside of religion, if you don't agree with me on everything,
right,
there's no dialogue.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's because we ignore this concept of secondary and tertiary issues, which is that we can have a common primary goal to work on, to achieve, but we're so caught up on things way down the list that it makes it, impossible for there to even be dialogue. And so it sounds like, you were kind of experiencing that very early on. And I can tell you from a church history perspective, this is a modern problem. This is a 20th century problem.
As are most of these.
As are
today.
most things. The church specifically, there was a response to a rise in Darwinism and evolution, and all of a sudden, no compromise at that point. And everything became that issue. And it sucks because what it does is, it can have a negative influence. I can't, if you're a teenager, you're already questioning life is hard. It's weird.
Yeah.
You have hormones.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you're getting told this weird thing that's counter to everything you've known up to that point. But it sounds like it could be a negative experience, though, that has led you on, discovering something that you enjoy.
Of course, yeah. And it's the same way with, like you were saying, with politics. It's the same way where a lot of people just don't know how to dialogue anymore, which is a real issue.
Yeah, I think it's one thing I've really enjoyed about your Facebook and what you do with your podcast is you seem very respectful to everyone you interact with, and I appreciate that.
That is one of the main goals, is to learn about other people's beliefs, respect them, and try to dialogue and find. That's one of the whole points of the podcast, is to try to find some common ground where we can start to solve problems instead of talking past each other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I would say that, we'll probably get into this when we talk about criticisms, but the idea and the whole thing we're talking about, the pursuit of truth, the pursuit,
Yes.
like we've lost that in many ways. Even in schooling, we've lost the pursuit. It's here, I'm going to spoon feed you and hand you this information or this knowledge, and you're expected to memorize it.
Yep.
And when we
Pass a standardized test.
this test,
Fill in the right bubbles on the skin.
you're good to go. Whereas sometimes that exploration piece is important.
It's arguably more important than the information that you're teaching.
More important. I would say that, and I think I probably learned this most raising a kid, in that, those early stages of anything a human goes through. To stifle their exploration is to stifle their learning and their knowledge, right? You put a kid in a room with toys, and maybe they don't play with those toys the right way, but they figure it out by trial and error and exploring. Maybe they get frustrated and they move on to something else, but then they come back and they try it again, and then they learn. Whereas if I just go over there and I say, "Look, this is how you do it," they're not gonna learn that. They're just, now what they've learned is, oh, well, if I just sit here and cry, Daddy will come show me how to do it, and give me the answer. And so we've become dependent on others for our own knowledge, and so the pursuit, I think, is very important.
Carl Sagan had a really good quote about that. He was asked about the education system, and he said, you go into a kindergarten classroom and they're asking all these amazing questions. Why is the sky blue? Where does a rainbow come from? Why is grass green? And you go into a high school classroom and there's nothing. It's just deadness.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
I was an Intel analyst, and one of the things that I had to learn how to do, because I don't feel like I was prepared for it, is how to do like analytical critical thinking, which is, you look at a piece of data, and the best example I can give, and this is going to be a controversial one, but is during the election, there was like that one thing about, at this one time, they dumped 160,000 votes and they were all for Joe Biden. Even though that was resolved in like 20 minutes, it caught on like wildfire. And a friend of mine texted me and was like, "See, I told you this kind of stuff happens." And I'm like, "You're not looking at all the data. You are trying to fit data to fit your bias, because all the data says, yes, this happens, and it gets resolved. The system is intended to fix the issue, and it did that. That is what all the data says. And part of critical and analytical thinking is coming at something and looking at an entire data set without bias and determining what is the proper outcome. And we just don't do that. You talk about Shakespeare. Yeah. Let's teach people how to read Shakespeare. Let's not just let them read Macbeth. How do they analyze what Shakespeare is saying?
Well, within that example, I'm pretty sure there's multiple ways
to
take it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's probably whole degrees in college that are based on picking apart what it means, what it could mean.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah.
Some it's really dark humor. Some it's probably really naughty. I mean, like there's probably a wide
Some
gamut.
of it was that way, and that's one of the criticisms of PCA, is that they didn't teach the more
erotic nature.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. What about...
It's a problem of learning how to learn.
Yes.
We're not taught learning how to learn. And that's another thing I'm passionate about, is literacy within certain communities. So medical literacy or what's the other thing you were talking about? Data literacy, how to read data or how to read a medical thing that comes out. Like the study that came out about COVID comorbidities, excuse me, where only 6% of people only had COVID. And people were taking that with whatever biases they have, you know, or taking that whichever way without actually knowing how to read a death certificate.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where, I think social media, and just having the internet on your phone at your side the whole time, instant access to information is, while a good thing, the danger of it is if you don't understand what that information means or how to interpret that information, maybe it's not a good thing.
Yes, it's the biggest double-edged sword today because I have, you know, on my phone, I have access to so much knowledge. I can read ancient texts. I can read the writings of every famous person ever at a moment's notice, but there's so much information we just get lost in it, and you can find wrong things just as easily.
Well, that's what's wild to me talking about the internet. So, if I remember growing up, don't believe everything you read on the internet. That was told to me all the time. And I think that was motivated from a distrust of something new.
Yeah.
And people made that, so you can't trust everything that's
and
there.
Be careful what you put on the internet. That's when I heard a lot.
Right, that's true. Be careful what you put out there on the internet. Then there was Google, and we can someone's probably coined it the information age or whatever, where at the click of a button you can get, you know, respected peer reviews and you know, what am I trying to say? Scholarly journals and things like that, where it's literal trusted information is now out there and in a searchable format. So now all this information, yes, I can Google search what happened yesterday at 5 p.m. in New York City and get an answer that's very much right. So I can trust it.
But the problem is it's also side by side with information that's very much wrong.
Right. And so now we're in this era with maybe social media involved where harkening back to, hey, don't trust everything you read on the internet anymore. Like, it's definitely not always true. But that's the stuff that seems to get shared. And I'm just going to say this. I don't want to get too in the weeds with this, but the people that were telling us to not trust everything we read on the internet are the ones now trusting everything they read on the internet, which is so bizarre to me.
But to your point, like you were saying, they're side by side, and most of the time you can't tell the difference.
Yeah. Well, and if formulated correctly, it's persuasive. It's believable.
Yeah. The prettier websites are going to catch your attention, and it may be the ones that are false.
I often tell people that the basis of every good conspiracy theory is actual information.
Yep.
They're all based on a fact or several facts. It's everything else that comes after that's the problem. And I think that's why, and this kind of leads me to my next question, which is, how would you convince a person that this is something that they should pursue? That, like, hey, maybe learning how to critically think or learning how to research and analyze is good for you, and it's not, it actually makes the world, it helps make the world better. How would you pitch that to somebody?
I mean, you have to, if you want to exist and be a part of society. I mean, especially with the past couple years between Black Lives Matter and the Trump presidency and things like that going on in politics and social issues, it's been so divisive to where I've lost family members, not literally, but as in just lost communication with family members and friends over, like we were talking about before, tertiary issues, things that aren't as important, but it can ruin friends, family, all kind of relationships. So, I mean, you have to have some critical thinking just to be able to get along with people. It gets even worse because we're still in the mindset of, we can't talk about politics or religion because it's going to, it makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I feel like if we were more educated on those kind of things, we wouldn't have the issue of feeling uncomfortable with it.
Right. Or Yeah, I mean, it's to your point. It breaks up relationships, and that's why we don't talk about it. But if people were better equipped and better trained to engage in those kind of conversations and still walk away without any hard feelings, I think it would make everybody better.
Yeah, I there's just so much we can learn too, like from each other. Grant, what makes it interesting to me about all of this, and I don't. This is going to sound like a terrible question, and I don't mean it to. But what's interesting to me about this is, it seems like something that a person would pursue in college, and that's never really been like a passion for you, has it? I mean, to go to university, but
No, I've taken a few college classes, but nothing serious. I got straight into the workforce at 15, working at Halloween stores and Whataburger. And after high school, I went straight into industrial work. I was working an industrial job at 19, and I've just stayed in it ever since. So with working full-time, I just never took the time to go to college. But it's definitely something I do in my free time.
Yeah.
More so.
It's I only say it because there's a lot wrong about college. A lot wrong about how it's, and I say that as a person with a degree.
It's a mixed bag.
Yes. However, things like my college, you have to take philosophy.
Yeah.
It's required. And it was even more interesting about that is I went to a Christian university, and there's a lot about philosophy that is not Christian in nature. And yet still we're required to take it.
Right.
And it was good for us that we were required to take it. So I think if I could tell anyone, if I could sum up the point of college to university to anyone, it's that you learn to ask a question.
Yes. The most important thing to me about college is...
That's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah. The most important thing to me about college is learning people from other walks of life.
Yes. Also
literally, because you'll find roommates or, people in lunchrooms or whatever that are from different walks of life. But if you don't meet those people, at least you'll learn it in the textbooks or in the classroom. They'll show you people from other walks of life. But I mean, I do that in my own time for much less money.
Yeah. No. And that might be the better way to go.
I mean, I have philosophy textbooks that I've picked up for a couple bucks at yard sales, because they're a few years old. Whereas if I was going to college, they'd be, a couple $100 for textbooks.
And that makes me think, too, and I don't know if I've ever thought about this, but going back to what we're saying about the internet and the access of information, going to university once upon a time was an extreme privilege.
Yes.
Even when it was, quote unquote, not that expensive. At some point it was how many miles away by horse and buggy, and how far away from medical attention and family. Like it wasn't.
It was also if you were white.
Right, and privileged.
And wealthy.
And wealthy, exactly. You were still wealthy if you were able to do that sort of thing because you didn't have to be at home working, to provide. You could go to university and study. Whereas now it's become this almost social requirement that, you graduate high school, you go to college, you get a degree, you get a job. And that, my point to that, though, is that you didn't have access to that information unless you went to university. You didn't have access to the books and the people with experience who could teach it to you. Whereas now, probably even on YouTube, you can look up lots of things that are reliable from people with degrees. You can, like you said, buy the books online that are used in university to read yourself. So if you desire that knowledge, you can get it, which makes you a better person and makes you more qualified for the things that you do. So but again, that to me goes, again, just to come back to it, to that pursuit of truth and knowledge. I mean, people that went to university back in the day wanted to pursue that knowledge and that philosophy. And so that's still a thing you can do, just a different way.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly an advantage of modern technology. And probably one where used properly. Also, it's going back to double-edged sword, used negatively because people are like, well, this is real truth. And that brings up the whole other question is, what is real and what's false and what's fake? And it's such a hot topic in today's society that learning how to pursue it is as important as doing it.
Yes.
We have never really handled such a heavy topic.
Nope.
I don't think here. But, how did you think about coming about doing a podcast on this? And then two, like, how do you keep it kind of, how do you approach the conversations with people, without like intimidating them? Because so many people probably would be like you said, don't talk about politics and religion. If I mess up the dynamic,
that's a thing around the the family dining room table. It used to be. It's like, don't talk about anything that's going to be, I don't know the word.
Taboo.
Yeah, well, and
Exactly, taboo
people
is
say
the
don't do
word.
it at work either.
Yeah.
Don't do it at work either. I mean, now in today's cancel culture, air quotes, you could lose your job if you offend the wrong person or say the wrong thing. And we're seeing that every day with celebrities getting fired and all that kind of thing. But it's important to approach it with a sense of openness. I don't want to approach any discussion or topic already thinking that I understand it, which is
So it's
really important
academic.
to me. Yes. I'm going into it with as many or as few biases and as little understanding as I can to force myself to look at it as a new perspective.
Yeah, I think that's obviously the healthiest way to do it.
Yes.
And not just because that's what's required to probably cultivate that conversation, but it's also the healthiest way for you to, engage and learn and grow from the conversation.
That's actually the reason for the name Newly Independent. Was I was newly independent from religion. I became agnostic, and I was newly independent as politically independent. I was Republican for the longest time, and I became an independent. So I approach every topic from that point of view as an agnostic and as an independent, which I see as the best way to approach things without a certain viewpoint. I'm not coming into it with a Christian perspective or a Muslim perspective or a Republican or Democrat perspective. I'm coming at it and saying, what's the best way to do this?
Yeah. When I was in the Air Force, I had the privilege of working in a very secluded, what we call a SCIF, which is a secret facility, and then I was privileged to have some very special clearances and accesses. So there was, even among my intel unit, there was only a handful of us who had this other thing. And so in my office, there were only two of us. I mean, it was probably 3 times as big as the room we're sitting in, but only 2 of us were read into the program. So we had this massive office, just the 2 of us. And the guy who sat across from me, very similar, independent, agnostic guy. We would you always play music outside of your door, so if you can't hear the conversation happening inside, and so we would play name that tune all the time and stuff like that, and we eventually just became very, very close, and we definitely engaged in political and religious talk when probably shouldn't. It's especially taboo in the military. You shouldn't do it, but we did, and both of us, I feel like it only enhanced our relationship because it allowed us to better understand one another. And because we had already spent so much time together and built a relationship, maybe through dumb things like name that tune, but we already liked each other. We wanted to know each other better.
Yes.
We wanted to understand each other. And once we did, then we were, very involved in each other's lives. Like his wife used to tell me, she'd be like, I can't make him do anything. She would text me like, I can't make him do this. You need to come over and tell him. and I would be like, hey man, let's go do this. And he'd be like, all right away. And she'd been trying to do it for like 2 weeks.
That's funny.
Just because that's how close we were and the connection and the bond we had. And I think if you approach people with, I want to understand you, not that I want to change you.
Exactly.
You can have a better and a bigger influence on each other's lives.
Well, and we usually, at least in my experience, when you approach any situation that way, any topic, you usually come a little bit more to center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody usually ends up sort of kind of going, okay, I see that. Maybe I don't choose to believe that or I disagree with that, but I see how you got there. I see how you're a competent individual. I see how you're smart, and I can kind of see that perspective.
I think that's more important.
Right. And then the other side does the same thing. And so usually in most situations, truth lies somewhere in the middle, right?
Yep.
And so, especially talking politically, it's not far left and it's not far right. It's somewhere in the middle is our solution. Now that can be dangerous because sometimes you need one extreme or the other, and there is undeniable truth, but on those things that aren't so clear cut, it's somewhere in the middle. And it's helpful to have that discussion so you can meet in the middle and establish some sort of truth, I think.
Yeah, no, completely agree. It's again, we've talked about, we said this several times, but it's just a healthy practice that a lot of people need to learn. We just haven't done a very good job with it. And I know from a Christian perspective, talking about growing up in a like a Southern Baptist private school, like a lot of the problems that we face, and this is spread politically because of how political the church has become, we're ignoring 2,000 years of church history for 100 years of church history.
Yes.
And because of that, we're not actually as right on these issues as we think we are, but we're so implanted in these roots. And it's hard to break away. And we need to learn how to reevaluate where we come from. And it's tough. But I agree with you. It's enjoyable.
And just saying what you just said is already taboo in some circles.
Oh, yeah. Well,
like there's some people you could say that to that would be very offended.
Oh, yeah. My parents and in-laws, probably.
Yeah. Plenty of people listening to this podcast, I can tell you that. But, and again, just to circle back on that again, I mean, I was a part of a guy's college, young adult. We call it a Bible study, but it wasn't quite your most traditional form of that. And many of us had, within the Christian context, within really even mostly Southern Baptist context, very opposite views on certain things. And very...
Calvinist Arminius.
Basically, very opposite sides of a lot of the issues. But we would come together and we would discuss some of the more controversial passages of Scripture. And there were sometimes we'd invite people in that we had never met, and they would end up bringing this whole different wave of disagreeing into the picture. And it was like we would just back and forth around the room. This is not a thing that you can find very often.
Yeah.
It's not always healthy, to be honest with you. But every week we came back, and every week, by the end of the hour, 2 hour, sometimes 3 hour conversation, everybody had shifted a little bit from their thinking the way they started when they came in. And through that, we grew closer together. I mean, to this day, and that was probably now 10 or 12 years ago. Am I that old? Yeah, probably 10 years ago. To this day, those guys are brothers to me. And I have some of them I haven't seen in at least 5 or 6 years. But without a doubt, that bond, like you were saying, with your coworker is tight. And I mean, imagine if you scale that to a community, you scale that to a city and a state. If we all interacted that way, what that would do for people.
Yeah, if you just open yourself up to new ways of thinking just to see why people believe it. That's the other part, is not just what people believe, but why they believe it. Because then you can kind of get more of an understanding. Because even if what someone believes sounds crazy, you can see the stepping stones to get there of how they built that foundation or belief.
And ultimately, it's about the person, right? Yeah. I mean, I think any discourse like that's about the person, not, well, some people might think it's about the topic and the
yeah, idea, I mean, it depends where you're coming at it. But you kind of said this, and then you just reiterated it. The why a person believes it, to me, is more important than what they believe. Because we need to stop approaching every conversation as, I need to change your mind.
Right.
And just...
I'm right, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Correct.
I was going to say,
I'm going to do whatever I can.
I need to be right.
Yeah.
Because you're never going to learn anything that way.
What we need to start focusing on is, I need to understand you.
Yes.
And if you can understand me in the process, even better.
Yeah. Well, and maybe I am right. Maybe you are right. But you're never going to convince me if you don't understand me. And I'm never going to convince you if I don't understand you.
Correct. we have to. It's just something that is both enjoyable. I enjoy the conversation, but then it also improves us as people. And it's, with that though, we always ask, what's a critique? What's a negative? What do you think there are some things that need to be worked on, that we can improve the pursuit for truth?
Well, I think we've already been kind of talking about that, because there's so much to critique when it comes to politics and religion and discussing those things, but it's just approaching it with a sense of wanting to understand and wanting to grow. And from there, finding out what the common goal is. Because I think a lot of the times Republicans or Democrats, leftists or right-wingers, they have the same goal. They just disagree about how to get there. And I think if we can open more discussion up, not to talk past each other or say what talking points are right, but as a point of, this is the common goal. Let's agree on that first. Then we can talk about how to get there. I think a lot of times we just don't talk about what the goal is.
Yeah.
We disagree on the goal. So we can't even, there's no point in even trying to talk about the problems, because we can't even agree on a goal.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly one of the biggest challenges, and when you discuss politics, is that we each come at what the problem sets are. We each come with totally different problem sets, and instead of having a common problem and just different solutions for that problem, and that makes it challenging. So being honest that, again, goes back to understanding data and being able to analyze situations and finding what's primary, what's secondary, what's tertiary, and then we can discuss solutions. And because we probably both don't have a correct solution, so together maybe we can come up with the best one. But
I think the best idea I've heard on it is the veil of ignorance. I don't know if you've heard of the veil of ignorance.
Go ahead and explain.
It's this idea that came about in the 70s. I forget who came up with it. It's John something. But the veil of ignorance is this idea that before you go into the world, just say this imaginary situation, before you come into the world, you get to design the world however you want to. But you're behind this veil of ignorance to where you don't know who you're going to be in the world. So behind this veil of ignorance, you can shape the world however you want to, however you see fit, but you don't know who you're going to be. You don't know if you're going to be black. You don't know if you're going to be white. You don't know if you're going to be disabled. You don't know if you're going to be blind. You have no idea. So from that perspective, you're going to build the world that's the best possible outcome for everyone, because you don't know. Now, if you built a world that was built only for white people, or only for people that can see, or people that have both parents, you may not end up as one of those. So you're going to try to build the world the best you can for everyone.
Talking all this, we haven't really. I want to make a philosophy reference, but if you've never read The Cave, this is kind of what The Cave is about, which is that, what you're trying to do, Grant, is lead people out of the cave.
Yes.
And people who are in the cave don't even realize they're there.
And myself. For all intents and purposes, the podcast is another way to force myself to research things. If I have to do a podcast episode,
accountability,
I have to spend the hours researching it and making sure I'm putting out something that's right, or as best I can be right.
So far in doing that, and I'm sure you have in your own just researching all these years, but so far in the podcast or where you are in the last few years, have you started out on that research and then said, that wasn't quite what I thought it was, or maybe enlightened more because of that pursuit?
Definitely more. I always learn so much, and that's the thing about going into it with no information, is I'm going to learn something. Not necessarily I'm going to get a concrete opinion on things, but I'm going to learn different viewpoints. And I always try to look up, when I'm researching, different points of view. So if I'm looking up something political, I'm going to read Fox News, CNN, and on down the line, both directions. Those kind of poor examples maybe, but I'm going to look at things from the left and right. I'm going to look at a Christian perspective, a Jewish perspective, and a Muslim perspective. I'm going to look at American perspective and non-American perspectives.
Is there a little nugget of information that you didn't know that you've discovered that is stuck with you that you just...
history of Christmas was very interesting.
Yeah.
Studying the history
you really
of Christmas.
dug in on that one.
Yeah, it was very enjoyable to dig into some of the history and things like that. I can't think of anything specific because the whole topic is just so interesting to me.
Yeah. Christ was not born on December 25th.
What?
That's the most interesting
Yeah.
one.
Controversial.
I will say, not to get in the weeds on that one, but I will say that while I did know a lot of the things, or I'd heard a lot of the things over the years of the different traditions that had slipped in here and there, and
been
their
incorporated
origins and things like that. I mean, just listening to your podcast, I was opened to even more that I didn't realize.
And a lot of it comes down to immigration.
Yeah.
Because there's stories from Germany, there's stories from India, there's stories from Poland and Europe. You think, how did we get all these different stories? It's from immigrants. In the early 1900s, all these people coming over, the melting pot of America in the early 1900s, and that whole time period of these people, and then they pass on their stories to their kids, and then you get this melting of just all these different stories into what we have today.
Yeah. Which may be controversial. How we celebrate Christmas today is not how people celebrated Christmas for thousands of years. But the second question we always ask everyone is, what does the future hold? Where do you see? Do you see more people, becoming more open to this? And where do you think?
I think I'm going to interject. I think culturally, and I could be wrong, and you can correct me. Culturally, we are in a turning point. Which way
Fair
we're going,
point.
I don't know.
I hope so.
But we're
An enlightening.
Definitely hope so.
So what do you? Yeah, any thoughts?
I definitely
on that?
hope we're in a turning point because it's getting to a really weird place. When, whether you agree with it or not, when the president is banned on social media platforms, that's a very interesting turn of events. It's a very important turn of events. Whether you agree with it or not, it's just a shocking statement. So hopefully we're on a better track where we can just become more educated. And I think that's the importance of pursuing truth, is so you can become more educated and learn how to have these discussions so that we don't dig our feet in with a position that's wrong.
Yeah.
Before we close out, for those out there listening, all four of you, if they're out there listening and say, wow, okay, I want to do this too. I want to start pursuing truth or expanding my horizons, especially if they come from a similar background as you did. What recommendations do you have for them to get started? Because, I can tell you, I would think that seems like a pretty daunting task to say, okay, well, I'm just now going to take responsibility for my own way of thinking, and I'm going to break away from all tradition I've ever known
And start reading Aristotle.
Where do you start? What do you do? What's that beginning? What's that first step on that path look like?
Find a question you want an answer to. And that can be as simple as, for me, for my first couple episodes, it was, where did Christmas come from? What's the history of Christmas? What's the war on Christmas? Is it that important? Is 2021 better? Is 2021 going to be better than 2020? Why was 2020 so bad? Was it so bad? Start with a question you want an answer to, because that goes back to what we were talking about, is if you're interested in something, you're going to enjoy learning about it more. So if it's a question you're interested in wanting an answer to, you're going to spend more time looking for the answer.
That's good.
That's really good. I just want to come back around to the "is it getting better" question. I taught in high schools for a long time, and I can tell you that the younger generation, while they keep making fun of me for being a millennial, they are smarter and more aware than I ever was at their age. And it gives me a lot of hope for the future. And there are a lot of people I know who are my age or who I think, Reagan and I have had this conversation before a lot, is that we were taught some really good principles growing up. And what's interesting is they led us to different places that maybe had taught our parents or our grandparents. But there seems to be kind of like, I don't know, a line And I mean, it sucks that it comes from age, but it feels like it's millennials and lower who have kind of more this common sense of unity and pursuit for, for truth, or just pursuit for understanding, that we want to make sure that we are, kind of, and there are exceptions. There are older people who are like this, and there are younger people who are not. I agreed. But I have felt that I've been able to have these kind of conversations and this kind of dialogue, and with people my age or younger, and it's been really, really productive and healthy. I mean,
I think our generation. I was born in '95, so I get put.
I think
in
you're
both
right on the border of a millennial. I think
some
95
put me
is
in millennial. Some would put me in Gen Z, so I'm kind of the bridge of the generations.
Yeah.
But I think both millennial and Gen Z is very invested in making the world a better place. And since we've grown up with all of this technology, we have access to a lot of information. And I think honestly, we both have just grown up in a different world. I mean, credit scores started in 1989.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a whole different world than it was 40, 50, 70 years ago.
Absolutely.
Yep.
There's a piece of data about the information age that we're in, where like every year with technology is like 10 years of learning or progress that it would have been years ago. You look at progress over time, and it just shoots up on the data table once it hits the early 90s.
It's someone explained to me, like, imagine you were filling up a pool, right? But that pool doesn't increase just 1, 2, 3. You're talking it doubles. That's what information does. So we go from 1% of the pool filled to 2% to 4% of the pool filled, and like the information, like 1995, the pool was like halfway filled. So the next place for us to go is 100%. And so over the last 25 years, our rate of growth has been exponential versus incremental. And it wasn't that way beforehand, and it's hard for people to adapt.
Yeah.
There's a lot of arguments that evolution or biology can't keep up with it.
Yeah. I would
Like
say
we
that
still have, like our thought process is still, 100 years old. We can't keep up with like the computer age mindset.
until Elon puts a little microchip in all of our skulls. It's going to happen.
Or Bill Gates.
Pays for it with Dogecoin.
It pays Bitcoin right now, but
Dogecoin.
We're hoping for Doge.
we're pumpers. Well, Grant, we appreciate you hanging out with us. Give us a minute. Tell us about Newly Independent, where they can find it, what you got going on.
Yeah, so Newly Independent podcast on most social medias at Newly Independent. And my personal page is at Grant Spencer II or Grant Spencer II. So yeah, you can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts.
When do you release? Do you have a schedule? How
I
often?
do not have a schedule. It's just every other week. So I try to do 2 episodes a month.
Okay.
Very cool.
So subscribe, and then you'll be notified.
Yeah, or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
You want those subscriptions. So.
Yeah, you definitely want those subscriptions. Everybody right now that's subscribed to ours, go subscribe to his. Do it.
Yes.
You will enjoy it. I have listened to them, and I have a good time. Thank you for listening to Fantastic People. Please rate and subscribe wherever you find your podcast, and follow us on social media. That's at Fantastic People Pod on Facebook, at Fantastic_People Pod on Instagram, and at Fantastic People, no E, on Twitter. We'd like to say thank you to Alex Edmondson for our artwork. We hope to see you guys next time. Thanks for listening.